Welcome, everybody. It's a great pleasure to introduce you to Peter Hall-Jones, who I'm sure many of you have had the opportunity and the benefit of speaking to over the last number of years. Peter and Imagine have had a professional working relationship for a good number of years, either through the British Council or also through exploring various different avenues in education. It's a great privilege to have him here today to talk to us about how to overcome the soft bigotry of low expectation. I'm sure we will all learn an awful lot from this and have many thoughts that will be pinging around following this. Should you have any questions during this time, please do put them in the chat section and I will have a look at those as we go through, and also at the end where we can post them to Pete. Other than that, I hope you will enjoy it, and we look forward to learning some from Pete. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hamish. Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us today to explore, and I want this to be discursive, at least between our own ears, if we can't do it face to face, around the future of how we assess, affirm, and value young people, each other, going forwards. And I've deliberately taken this phrase of the soft bigotry of low expectation, because if we can go to the next slide, Joanne, I first came across this, I think it's a rather lovely phrase. I think it's an elegant phrase. It rather rolls off the tongue. And I first came across it back in 2013 when the then Education Minister used it. And it was used, I think it'd be fair to say, against, lazily against those that might be identified as progressive educationists. And there was a suitably clever from Michael Gove, a suitably clever but not untypically lazy connection between soft bigotry and progressivism, which has rather stuck, and it's been used on and on since then to, in a pejorative sense, to make progressives justify their position. I think it was a very clever idea. I didn't realise it actually firstly came from George Bush, and when they both used it, they did talk about, quite rightly, that any soft bigotry of low expectation about the potential of others to perform and achieve highly. And I've taken that phrase deliberately to look at what I think is the soft bigotry of low expectation held by some traditionalists and those great advocates for examinations, because I think there are significant problems and weaknesses with exams and testing that many people would acknowledge. But I think it's time to put on our big girl and boy pants and say, we can do better than this. And to look around the world and to look at other sectors to see how other people not locked into the education world and some of the ideas they're exploring. And so during the course of this short presentation, I'll have a bit of a knock at the exams. We'll have a bit of a look at appraisal around the world, and then come up with a few ideas that I'll be really happy to discuss going on into the future. So, John, if I can have the next slide, please. It feels a bit like the COVID presentation here. Next slide, please. Now, this quote that you can see on there from Greg Ashman. Greg Ashman writes an awful lot around assessment, writes rigorously about it, is expert, knowledgeable, wise, fair, and it's a lovely quote to start off with. That exams are pants; they're just not as pants as everything else. And again, not of Greg himself. I think Greg has very high expectations of us all. But there is something of the the soft bigotry there. Not that Greg is either of those things, but that, come on. I think we can, to acknowledge that they're not great doesn't mean that they have to remain not great. And to this pretense, and Greg doesn't say this, but there's almost an assumption here that exams are as good as we can make them. And I just don't accept that. So if you move on to the next slide, Joe, the concern that I have with exams, and I speak as my 18-year-old daughter is upstairs revising for an A-level she's got this afternoon, is just looking at it both as a teacher and now as a parent, and for my work around the world as a consultant. it all just feels a bit daft. It just feels a bit of a waste of time. And I can't get past that there's got to be a better way. And I just picked up on this from Schools Week. And we're talking about 300 million quid a year being spent on these things, and that's just in schools in the UK. I don't think that includes the photocopy bill for all the mocks. And it certainly does include all the exams that are sector-specific exams outside of education. This is just schools. It's a huge amount of money. And I kind of think, well, are there some vested interest in here? Have we got a bit of an establishment thing here that we're going to have to tackle? Because there are a lot of good people, a lot of hard-working people. At the moment, their livelihoods kind of depend on this infrastructure, this whole process. And of course, because it's got a long tail of history, it kind of gets about it a resilience, and it kind of gets about it a credibility, because we've always, they're long-standing. Of course, there's this attraction to the past rather than that confidence in the future, which rather plays against those of us who would seek to innovate. So if we move on to the next slide, we can see that, that this establishment kind of buying goes on and on and on, because according to the IOE that 6 million quid a year being spent on tutors because parents are a bit worried that kids aren't going to crack it in the exams or for whatever reason, they want to build up their kids' confidence. Now this £6 million isn't being spent by all parents. This idea that exams are kind of fairer than, well, which parents is it who can afford to spend this money on private tutors? I put it to you, it's not every parent that can afford this sort of money. It's 30 quid an hour at the moment in the UK to buy this sort of private tutelage. So there is a massive business around this. There is a huge amount of money. There is a huge emotional and financial investment in keeping exams as they are. And there is this kind of hegemony that the establishment, the people in the establishment got there because of their exam passes, therefore exams are good. And whilst, I wasn't able to do Gulliver's Travels as part of my A-level English exam, that stuff about the hoops and the egg cups and the tightropes comes back to mind that, we did it, it was good for me, it's the only fair system, it's how you have a meritocracy. And of course, there's been some interesting conversations recently on Twitter around, well, meritocracy. Is it really a meritocracy, and is exams the best way of doing it? And, there's some complicated stuff there. And I noticed that yesterday on the establishment that is Twitter, somebody noted that a poem that I think was used in this year's SATS exams for 11-year-olds in the UK had previously been used as a GCSE poem. Now, I'm quite sure you can use the same poem with different age kids and with different abilities. I'm not saying that. But, if I was a parent thinking, what? They're using the same poem. Now, is that a rising standards that what was once a GCSE poem is now a SATS poem? No, I don't think it's that. But I just think for an outsider, it just gives further ammunition for people who think, I'm not sure about exams. There's got to be something better, and I certainly agree. If we can move on, John, to the next slide. Because these exams, they ain't perfect. Living where I live in the north of England, I've got several neighbours who are examiners who sit down with good intent, working very hard, having to crack through hundreds, maybe thousands of scripts, and they've got an exemplar at the side of them. You wouldn't really want me assessing an A-level physics paper, but I've got neighbours and friends who are doing just that, and their knowledge of physics is no greater than mine. But they've got the exemplar beside them, and I'm not knocking them. They're good people. They're trying really, really hard. I haven't got a better idea about how you mark those exams, but we find out that it's not particularly accurate. And, there's all sorts of talk about, is it 1 in 4 that you could go up a grade or down a grade, and it's not a perfect system, and we've got to stop. It feels like there's a red rope round it, and we have to keep polishing this exam thing because it's great and it's mighty, and our best universities do it, and our cleverest people have got lots of qualifications. Therefore, no, I'm just not sure. So if you move on to the next slide again, please. I'm kind of looking for a justification for it, because this is this graph as used in the HEPI report in August. Some of this stuff is a bit old, I appreciate that, but we keep reading about employers who aren't too sure that the exam results are the be-all and end-all. We keep reading about, blue chip companies are saying, well, we don't bother with people with degrees now, we just want decent. And we see the rise of modern apprenticeships and other sorts of apprenticeships. And and it's interesting, just again looking at through my daughter's eyes, if I can be at that small scale, the number of her friends from archetypal middle class backgrounds pursuing archetypal middle class careers, and they're looking at apprenticeships. So I do kind of wonder whether the heat is on when it comes to examinations, because I'm not sure, really, if you scratch the surface, I'm not really sure that anyone is defending them that rigorously. I think the genie's out of the bottle on this one. And I think if we move on to the next slide, we have some really brutal stuff, this one from our school. And of course, the realization that, and I think, COVID, all the tragedies involved in COVID, but one of the good things that coming out of it, is that parental awareness of examinations, parental consideration about, well, our kids didn't do exams, they don't seem to be any worse off. This kind of awareness that parents and carers have got now about pedagogy, about learning, about sitting in front of a laptop, about being talked at, about revision, about Wi-Fi, about access to IT, about tutor classes, about online supervision. I think we're a lot wiser, we're a lot more mature. We've also thought about the importance of well-being and community and companionship and social and getting out in the garden and having some fresh air and not, all work and no play makes all sorts of people dull. And we've also got this awareness about the flipping algorithm. Where's this algorithm going to go? How are we going to make it fair? What is fair? And the realization that, across the parental body, that the algorithm and the grade boundaries and the curve of distribution is there in order to make sure that 1/3 of kids told their failures. It just seems utterly bizarre. In the UK, we've now got systems where we're assessing younger and younger children with good intent, but the language that goes around it, that, your 5-year-old, your 6-year-old, your 7-year-old is not reaching expected standards. I'm thinking, well, my 6-year-old and my 7-year-old still believe in the Tooth Fairy and Father Christmas, and long may that continue. So don't be telling me that my kid's not at the expected standard. My kid's just fine, age 7, thank you very much. So I think there's a real explosion, awareness, illumination of the nuances and the daftness and the unfairness and the bonkersness of examination processes, not least because some of those parents who were at home supervising their kids on their online learning where available, those parents were also working from home, those fortunate to be in employment and able to work from home during COVID. And I think it allowed lots, from my conversations, this is not a massive piece of research, from my conversations with archetypal professional middle-class parents, voters, people who have got to where they've got because of their exam results, and typically might be the ones who are paying £6 million a year, not necessarily each, but on tutelage, and they're kind of being at home working, seeing the way their kids are working, and saying, but we do this different. It's not like that in the world of work. And I think the genie is out of the bottle again. I think parents are a bit more confident to say, I'm not sure you've got this one right, guys. But of course, as teachers, we tell them, you don't understand. This is schools. We're different. And I think that one's been blown apart a bit as well. So, we have a system now which is set up to divide and ensure that 1/3 of kids don't, and some kids do. And we're fiddling around with university entrance. And if you come from a comp, you can get to Oxford. And there's one school that gets 500 kids to go to Oxford, and there's a private school that doesn't get any. And that's a bit tense. And I'm sure the Telegraph get excited about it. But there's something more important than this. If we go on to the next slide, please, Joanne. Now, this whole centre assess grades bit, which was a bit complicated, and it got a bit, the algorithm was in, the algorithm was out. It was a bit hokey pokey for a while. But what was interesting was, in the conversations that we were having with so many parents, was this realisation that you can either test kids in a race, or you can see what their personal best is. Now, I was told, and I did a bit of research and I couldn't find it, but there might be people out there that know better than me, that for Olympic trials, some countries select their athletes according to their personal best and their record over time. And I believe some countries have trials, and if you don't win the race, you don't get in the Olympic team. And I think that's interesting, because I'm really interested in the idea of personal best. And there's some stuff there around Carol Dweck, I suppose, about rewarding effort rather than rewarding talent. But the idea of personal best, and if you motivate, if people are, there was the Canadian ice skater whose brother took a baseball bat to someone's knees. If you focus on your personal best, you can't control the other athletes, but you've got some efficacy, some agency over your personal best. And if I focus on my personal best, other athletes will do what they do, but I'm responsible for what I do. And if I keep working on my personal best and it gets better, then de facto at some point I could win, but maybe I'm never going to beat that guy, because she's faster than me. So what I think was interesting with centre assessed grades was, and all the grades have been inflated. So no. This is where teachers and others, moderated to death, have said this is the level the kid is operating at. This is what they get when they are operating at their best. But when it comes to the exam, the race, they may not do as well. But then when we come to the exam, unlike a race, we then say, okay, well, all 8 athletes have won. We're now going to put the curve of distribution on it and decide who, but 3 of you can't ever win. So, and it reminds me of a Mick Walters story about the 4-minute mile. I mean, back in the day, some of us old enough to remember it being broken the first time. But, if you can't do a 4-minute mile now, then don't even bother turning up to your local track. Now, we've got thousands of people, average, far better than me, I'm clean at average, can do a 4-minute mile. Well, it doesn't mean the miles got shorter. We haven't put a curve of distribution around it. We haven't said, oh, too many people are doing the 4-minute mile. We'll have to do it uphill, or we'll have to do it unseen, or we'll have to do something with the track, the unseen track conditions. We've just said, well, more people have passed. And I think parents who saw the centre assessed grades who said, well, that seems fair. The kid's been doing that work over a period of time. It's been moderated. It's been compared to exemplar material. It's been to the head of department. It's been to the deputy head. It's been across the mat. It's been with neighbouring schools. And all those young people who got those grades went to university. And there is a downside to that, because it means this year it's a bit harder to get in because some universities don't regulate. But that's an interesting one for the market economy. They thought the more people that want to go to a good school, they're supposed to be allowed to go. But all of a sudden, the more people who pass can't go to university. So there's a bit of economics there, but we could sort that one out. So I think the centre assessed grades, although it's a bit contentious, I know there's a few headlines about it and a bit of banter on Twitter and Mumsnet and Question Time, but the genie's out of the bottle. We can assess people over time, and there's issues about bias, and we're going to come on to that in a minute. I'm completely not ignoring that at all, but there's bias in the exams too. There's bias about the kids who've got Wi-Fi. There's bias about the kids who get tutors. There's bias about kids who go to cramming schools. There's bias about kids who go to schools where the teachers have taught the subject before. There's lots of biases, and let's not claim. I've never heard anybody who does claim that the exams are bias-free either. But let's move on to the next slide, because I'm getting angry. So I didn't do Robbie Burns in my A-level English, because obviously not English, so why would we have him in an English-based exam system? But this lovely line about how would we see others as others see us? And I think there's been a bit of reflection over COVID, hasn't it, about what's important, what's valuable, who's important. Your neighbour that brought round a cake, your neighbour that came out and said, are you all right? Teacher that came online and had a chat with you. We really, as well as our extraordinary people who looked after us in all sorts of ways, it's been a bit of reflection about value and my contribution to society and how do other people see us. I thought I was important, but I'm not. So I think this notion of seeing ourselves as other people see us has always been there. It's nothing new, but I think it's come through. And so it got me thinking more and more. But I've always been interested in appraisal. Always been into millions and millions of people who do appraisal. The science and the R&D that's gone into appraisal systems, the psychology, the data wallers, the statistical wallers, the human experience, the research, the PhDs, the money that's gone into appraisals. And teachers can do appraisals, and head teachers can do appraisals, and classroom assistants can do appraisals. But we can't do it with kids. So I've had to look at appraisals. So if you go on to the next slide for us, John. Now, as soon as I see the phrase Generation Y and Generation Z, I've got to be able to switch off a bit. But yeah, statistics. But yeah, let's take these ones suit me, so I'll use them. That's what the exam folks do, so why can't I do it? On the spot recognition over formal reviews. I suppose you could take exam as a formal review on the spot. I love the stuff that these guys at Perform do. This on the spot, right now, right for me, point of learning, capture it. Constructive feedback throughout the year, keeping people going, whispering in their ear. Okay, I would say that, I'm a coach, wouldn't I? But there's stuff out there. If you go on to the next slide, please. All right. This stuff from Laurie Lee, I keep getting confused with Laurie Lee and Sally Rosie, but this is a review of Google's way, and I just thought, the 5 key tactics to involve your organisation's performance management process. Well, we're really into feedback with kids now, aren't we? Marking's out, feedback's in. Well, this is feedback. This is how we do it. And why would you have all this industry now around feedback and no more marking and all that stuff? And I'll come on to these later on. But we've got all this going on about feedback, and then we've still got people saying, but we'll have exams at the end. So there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect here. So I'm just calling it out, and if everyone wants to join in, that's absolutely fine. But the rest of the world is doing this. If you go on to the next slide, John, I'm not saying that appraisals are perfect. This comes out of Google. If you're talking about modernity, you've got to quote Google because clearly they're perfect, not. But this is the questionnaire. There's a lovely one from Timpson's that I'll share with you if you ever want it. How Timpson's evaluate their managers. But this is what if you just took the word manager out and put teacher in. And you've got the kids to evaluate what the teacher's doing this. I know some teachers get a real hissy fit about being evaluated, but it makes me laugh because kids evaluate us all the time. You choose subjects according to the teacher. You engage or you disengage according to the teacher. You put your hand up or you don't put your hand up according to the teacher. So we're evaluating them all the time. You're mean about them or you like them more. It's just that we'll just take it out and make it formal. I can't see why anyone would stop that. But this idea about how you might evaluate each other, how you might get kids to evaluate each other, shock horror, as if they don't do that already on TikTok and on other social media platforms. We could just bring it out into the open and start to use it and use that kind of black box mindset and really understand what's going on amongst our student body. And be able to capture that in a way that shows the learning journey. But I suppose if I've used the learning journey, there'll be all sorts of people who've switched off immediately. So I will delete that when it goes out to the public. Okay, let's go on to the next slide if you wouldn't mind, please, Joel. In Googlers, again, I read that word and I tend to switch off a bit. But anyway, Googlers are free to solicit feedback on specific topics at any point in the year rather than waiting for a single day. I find it fascinating that you do. They're called terminal exams. Well, I always make laugh. If doctors did that, so you go around the ward at the end of the year. So they're dead. Oh, they're alive. They're dead. It's terminal. Why would you do this assessment as the kids walking out of school? I just find it staggering that you wouldn't do it earlier on. And I know people do a formative assessment and all that stuff. I know that, but we got how much was it? £300 million a year as they walk out the door. When they're going, utter madness. And it's supposed to evaluate the school, but it seems to evaluate the kids to me. So Googlers have realised the nonsense. Googlers are into assessment for learning and 360. And if it's good enough for Google, it's good enough for me. So let's have the next slide, shall we? I'm not saying that appraisal is perfect, okay? What does interest me is this kind of this vested interest. And if you want this kind of continuous feedback, who would ever ask for it? You get this argument that if exams were optional. When I was a head teacher, I said, well, could we provide 2 curriculums? One for the kids who want to do exams, so I don't get sent to jail for not providing them. But another curriculum, which would be the same basically, for the kids who don't want to do exams, so I could cover myself by offering them. But if you don't want to take them, that's fine by me. But could we flip the mindset? And I've been having a chat with Ofsted recently. About why don't we make Ofsted optional? Because nobody would ever want it. Well, I think that's real soft bigotry of low expectation. And if you've seen these food hygiene stickers in your doors. Well, as I understand it, the story is that environmental health officers used to get tooled up and do a raid in order to find some sort of insect crawling over your hamburger or your souffle. And it became quite militaristic in how they would go about it, and people would get cleverer and cleverer and cleverer. And then they come up with this sticker. And they would tell people, don't go into that shop if it hasn't got, well, it's up to you, but basically don't go into it if it hasn't got a 5. Would you know when you go into a restaurant that's only got a 1? Probably not. And they put these stickers in the doors, and people started to make choices. And as I understand it, within 18 months, restaurants and fast food joints, the country over, were saying, come and inspect us, we want the 5-star rating. Completely flipped environmental health mentality over about 2 years, just by putting a green sticker in the door. Well, there's other people who do it, the fair trade sticker, the fair tax sticker, it goes on and on. You can flip the mindset. It doesn't have to be a have to, it can be a want to. And if we have time another day, we'll talk about the difference of those two. So I think we can flip it, and we can say, if you want to be assessed, when do you want to be assessed? I mean, maybe they all did driving tests in July. I mean, it's kind of bizarre, isn't it? But you do a driving test when you think you're ready. And if you're Michael Gove, you do it 7 times, and that's okay, Michael. I don't care how long you do as many tests as you want, mate. But why would we say it's, we've got this one now, if you didn't pass your English first time, you can't get funding. And I'm assuming that's a red herring, or is it a dead cat? I get my animals mixed up. But that's a nonsense. And we could have this, that you get assessed as and when you want, and you get assessed because you want to find out how you're getting on. I mean, I get on the scales when I want to find out. I don't get on the scales once a year. I get on the scales when I think I might be a bit lighter right now if I go and do it. So, and if it's not a bit lighter, I'll cut back. So, it's madness. Let's go on to the next slide. So again, this is the Harvard Business Review, and you've got to quote those because they're big boys and girls, and they're part of the establishment. So financial rewards and punishments. I'm thinking Ofsted. I don't know what you're thinking. And the end of year structure, holding people accountable for past behaviour. This whole idea that why on earth will you do it at the end of the year? So if you move on to the next slide, Joe, where sort of new appraisal, where appraisal is going now, it says that this assertion from their research that employees who are deeply motivated by the potential for learning and advancement. Well, do you know what? I've never met a kid who don't want to learn. I've never met a kid who isn't motivated by having their potential realised. And these kids that we fail when we put them in the right context, whether it's proofs or amazing stuff that big picture learning and other people do, when we get inside them and we find what they're interested in and we gently challenge them appropriately, they're like rockets to take off. It's not rocket science. I also remember I did a bit of work with it was the big office, Steelcase, the big office French manufacturers who design offices, and they said that young people leaving schools now are motivated by proximity to decision making and access to knowledge. And office design is based around the fact that young people are leaving school with that mindset. So we've got to start thinking that we have to find ways of motivating them to do the exams. We've got to kid them and motivate them and push them and berate them and kid them and cajole them, and start saying, as you're going through, as you're learning stuff, why don't we just tick it off and check it? And again, that's why I'm really excited by my products, particularly Perform, that we can capture it right now, right then, right for me, critically. Element of self-assessment. Oh, I thought I was better than that. You don't see me better than that. That conversation that takes around, well, why do you think that? How do you see it? That opportunity to apply knowledge in new and novel situations, the definition to me of creativity. This opportunity to say, well, I know it, and I know it so well, I can apply it here, and I can apply it there, and I know A, and I know B, and I can put A and B together and call it C. That might be what we call entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. We might call it imagination. We might call it creativity. We might call it applied knowledge. We might call it evidence of knowledge. All sorts of things that we can do right now, right for me, without waiting until June to stick them in the sports hall and say, crack on, you got 3 hours, extra paper, but you can't go to the loo, and make sure you haven't got a label on your water bottle. Can we go on to the next slide, please? General electric, now, hundreds of years, innovative stuff, highly interesting stuff. I love these 2 questions. I love the simplicity. If you think about it, in every relationship you've got, whether it's in sport or any other sector, those are 2. You could do it in a marriage, couldn't you? Maybe not. Maybe you could do it in a relationship with anybody. What is it that you should keep doing, and what is it that we should change? Isn't that the definition of progress? Is that not the definition of progress? And the annual goals are being replaced by shorter-term priorities. It's a priority for me. I think your next priority is to really crack that. Talk about priorities, to discuss which are the priorities, to develop that agency, to develop that efficacy in the learner. And we know from Martin Seligman's stuff, powerful evidence now around the importance of agency and efficacy when it comes to happiness and well-being and health. To allow young people to have, and all learners, to have agency around the selection of their priorities, to have agency around winning the bet, to have agency about who they involve in their 360. I would like this piece of evidence to be brought to the place. I would like this piece of evidence. We have a very different learning environment, a very different learner, a very different school leaver if we embraced what the rest of the world is doing. Next slide, please. So, what do I suggest? Next slide. I reckon we should have a 360 of 360s. I reckon we should get everyone together for an afternoon and say, show us your 360 and I'll show you mine, because I reckon they're pretty much all the same. I reckon we get a clever person or a couple of computers in a dark room and we crunch them and we come up with the ultimate 360. And I'd have faith groups, and I'd have social workers, and I'd have prisoners, and you have to have Google, and I'd have the Bank of England, and I'd have organisations all around the world come to say, well, there's our 360, and we'll pull them all together, and we'd have, and I know that in a sense, Imagine have done this with their competency framework. It's just extraordinary resource. But to get together kind of an ultimate 360, and this is, I think, would be a bit of a game changer, because we would have all these companies and other organisations and faith groups and social groups and third sector groups and public sector groups. So yeah, this is pretty much a 360 for the sort of person we want in the world. And then we would say, right, we'd then give that to schools, and I'll get all those organisations and the people who have been expert at using those appraisal systems in those organisations to work with teachers on how we might do it in school. And then we'll get one of these 360s for every kid, alongside their GCSEs, because of course you have to keep them, but alongside it. And then a kid could leave school with a 360, which being constructed by all these global and local organisations, the global and local organisations who've actually helped teachers to implement the 360 really well and effectively in schools with their kids. And kids would then leave school with this 360 and their GCSEs marked by someone down the road, 1 in 4 wrong. No employee really wants them, well, some employees don't really want them. And then they could leave with a 360 and a certificate with their exams, and the employers could say, well, we'll have a look at both. So that would be, so then, next slide, please, Joanne. Without that 360 going on, I think what would happen then is parents would get it, because lots of parents and carers have got 360s, so they'd understand how we're assessing and affirming and valuing kids. Parents would be contributing to that 360, as would peers, because that's what happens in the real world. You have all sorts of people chucking, well, I see this. So we'd have, just think about the potential quality of conversations you could have between parents to talk about the it, not to talk about you in your bedroom, not to talk about you and your homework, but to talk about the it, the appraisal, and to have robust conversations. There'll be biases, but the more people we get involved in this 360, the more we can challenge the biases. All right, we haven't just got my friend down the road marking your paper, and it may be getting reassessed by a moderator. Or if you can afford it, you can have it remarked. If you have it remarked and it goes down, you get the lower mark. It's high stakes. Don't go and get them remarked now. So I think this should be a fascinating prospect to engage parents and kids in learning, and for parents to re-engage with schooling, and for parents and schooling to re-engage with what the world really wants from its kids, and to do it in a fair, moderated, wider sense. And if you want to, you can have your A-level in physics as well, because I'm sure there are values to that. Next slide, please, Joe. So all sorts of biases. All sorts of biases about exams, all sorts of biases around marking, which have been explored, and they are hugely problematic. But I believe we have the ability across us as people to counteract those biases, as they have done, as they seek to do and have done in so many other sectors through appraisal processes. Next slide, please, John. when you do a music exam, I'm aware of Paul Tykes in the room, so I'm just mindful of this, but maybe Paul will contribute. When we got a music exam, my understanding is that two assessors, or I think invigilators in the music exam, examiners, the level of agreement between two music examiners is higher than the level of agreement between two people who've marked a script. Now, I can't find the evidence to support that. I've heard it mentioned several times. But this idea that we can be good at assessing what we see and what we hear and what we feel. We must be good at it, or we wouldn't have Ofsted, because that's what they do. We must be good at it because that's what teachers do with their NPQs and their ECTs and all the other letters of the alphabet. So it must be doable, but apparently it's not doable for young people. I don't understand how that can be true, because young people are just younger versions of people, so it must be possible. And if you move on to the next slide, please, Joanne, we know it's possible because I watch Strictly, and I know nothing about dance, but by about episode 3, I can tell whether it's a 7 or a 10. Now, I can't do the technical detail about a fleck, but I know it was a 7, or I know it was a 9, or I know it was a 4. Now, as an appraiser of a performance, I always know it moved me. I also know that it was beautiful. And when we have was it 30 seconds of silent dancing to experience what dancing is like for a hearing impaired dancer, I know how that feels, and I know how that looks, and I know how that sounds. And across the nation, we rather agreed on that one. So we can have people appraising fairly, even if they know nought. That's really interesting. And we know that's true because if we go on to the next slide, you're busy watching the Strictly there. We know that assessment is really, really important. I think I've got my slides in the wrong order. Is the next slide Daisy? I think it might be. I've got mine. Yeah. Oh no, where's Daisy gone? Next slide. What? Oh, I must have changed my mind. Let's go on to Daisy now. Daisy Christodoulou. That the comparative judgment and her use of assessing script, I think, is really, really interesting and really plays to that kind of Strictly mindset around not necessarily lay people observing and having their observations listed amongst those expert marked ones so that we can regulate our marking. We know there is a world out there that explores the notion of 360 and varied opinion. And the more varied opinions you get, intermingled with expert opinion, the safer and more secure judgments we can get. If we go back to the previous slide, we know that if it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck and it wiggles like a duck, it probably is a duck. We know from the extraordinary research that Hamish and his colleagues at Imagine have done with the perform stuff, that having a range of stakeholders, a range of observers, a range of contributors to a 360 appraisal, if you've exhibited a skill, a quality, an attribute, knowledge in a number of different settings and situations, and that's been observed by a range of people, expert and novice, if we've all seen you do it, you can probably do it. And I'm delighted that this webinar has taken place this morning because I've been able to cancel the builders in my house. But the builders we have working upstairs have come to us by recommendation and by review. I haven't checked out their city and guilds. I have checked out the photos and the letters from other people who've used them. And if all those people in those big posh houses and all those people in those smaller houses and all those people in those offices all say these builders are good, I'm pretty convinced that they're a safe bet, and so far so good, and I'll be here again shortly. If I now go back to the previous slide, we know that assessment is the ring in the bull of education. That if we pull the ring of assessment, the bull, the curriculum, the pedagogy, the schooling, the architecture, everything will follow. I'm really excited about working with colleagues who are taking part in this webinar at any time in furthering this conversation. I haven't got all the answers. The point of appraisal is that it will take maybe 360 of us to get together to shape this up. But when we shape this up and we work with those change breakers who are not in the vested interests, I think we can create an appraisal system which values the whole and takes us forward to a much more prosperous future based upon our potential, not upon the soft bigotry of low expectation. Thank you for your time, everybody. Really looking forward to the conversation that follows.
Well, as usual, Pete, you haven't disappointed. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Some great topics covered there. And again, you just kind of led us through very calmly, very nicely, and open up a whole load of thinking for people. And it's a real pleasure to listen to the way in which you see assessment and appraisal and the challenges that might face. We've got one question here on the chat asking, are you aware of any examples you've seen in education systems where experimenting, like you've just talked about, is actually happening? And what have been the outcomes, the successes, and the issues of that?
I think the biggest, strongest, best example would be the perform work in Egypt, Hamish, would it? Right? Would it be cheap to flip that back to you, because you will talk about it far more informally than me, and you'll be aware of the research and the robustness and the challenges? Is that fair?
I think it would be cheap, yes, Pete, but
not surprising.
But you know what? Yeah, okay.
Rather
than myself, I could answer that question very briefly and just say yes. Our experience in Egypt allowed us to work with a million teachers in terms of their own professional development, and we saw the affirmation of the agency grow. We also saw that by providing a kind of a bottom-up methodology whereby people were able to take ownership of their own professional development, their appraisal, as Pete was talking about, actually it grew something that was sustainable and self-motivating. So yes, ticking the box for what Pete was saying and what we witnessed out in Egypt.
I also think that if you look at the stuff, I know Hamish and I have been working a bit with Big Picture. Big Picture developed a credential, which is a form of a 360. That credential has, I think I'm right in saying, Hamish, been acknowledged, accepted by Melbourne University and others as a route to an access point to higher education. I think if we think about universities, and not just the OU, but other universities who will take equivalence into account when mature students apply for degree courses, I think there are some smaller examples there. But Big Picture and Perform in Egypt would be two powerful places to go to universities. I also think that alternative education offers us a much wider experience of how to affirm and value young people, and I think special ed is the other great skills builder. It's almost a competitor with Perform, but I think they are very different. But in special ed, the way in which we affirm and value young people going through special ed, and Tom Rees recently did a really interesting article with a colleague whose name has just escaped me. If you contact me, I'll find it for you, where Tom talked about meritocracy and how it fails the affirmation and valuing of the many young people in special schools, and that we need to look at more effective, more honest ways of evaluating beyond an algorithmic level boundaried false meritocracy, which seeks to maintain power by insisting that a third of people are deemed as failures. Not on my watch.
Thanks, Pete. Just building on there from something you just mentioned in terms of, I know you said alternative education. However, what we've been talking about today is maybe also alternative forms of assessment. However, do you see this as an alternative form of assessment or a complementary form of assessment?
I want my engineer to know the calibration for my brake pads. I want my nurse to know the right amount of insulin to inject. I want my farmer to know the right amount of insecticide if she insists on using insecticide. I'm not anti-knowledge. I do think that a test serves a purpose. My strategic view would be that we would offer a 360 alongside, or examination results would be part of the 360. I would then let the market decide where the emphasis shifts over time. I used to choose a phone on its ability to get a connection. I now choose a phone partly by the quality of camera. Actually, I choose a phone on whether the battery will last. Partly on cost. So I remember when I chose the criteria by which we choose things changes over time. To begin with, strategically, I would have them alongside. Then I would accept how the economy drives it. I think in different contexts there would be strong views for the examination having greater importance than in others. I suppose the tension that I do worry about is how we would challenge the vested interest is that says, oh, well, of course, that one was examined, therefore it's more valid. But we also know that exam boards are more valid. That university is more valid. History is more valid than business studies. All that utter nonsense. Depends on what you want to do and on your mindset, it seems to me. But all that snobbery would still need to be challenged. But that's why I think if we were to involve a whole range of stakeholders, the Microsofts, the Salvation Army, the social workers, the prison sector, yada, 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 on developing a global 360, who have a different vested interest. But I think that would be the game changer, because parents and kids would say there's a credibility that's born of those organisations, which gives it an equal but different credibility to X exam board or B exam board. So I think let the market decide, but put them side by side, make the exams part of the 360 if you wish, crack on. I mean, you know, we tried that record of failure, no, record of achievement, but that red folder. I suppose that was an attempt at it. That clearly didn't work. But you know, it means this didn't work doesn't mean we can't do it better next time, and we can learn from the experience of the past. That's kind of the point of education, isn't it? So I think just because that was a bit pants doesn't mean the next one won't be. And I kind of think that the millions of people who do appraisal, they can't all be wrong, and they can't all be progs. They can't all be woke. There's got to be some other types of people who think the appraisal is quite good. So, you know, we're pushing an open door here, really. I think, aren't we? Not.
Very good. No, I mean, well, you're talking to the converted here on this side of the screen, anyway. But an interesting question also that's just come in. It says you mentioned how we have to cajole or basically force students to take exams, sometimes against their will, with motivators of competition and life chances. What sort of messages does this give children about consent? Would you say this is ethical?
I love the power conversation. Ethical. I love this question. I think it's up for conversation. Is it ethical that I pull my daughter back when she walks out between two cars when she's 5? Is it ethical if I do it when she is 90, if it saves her life? Yes. Is it ethical that says if you want to be a doctor, the present system is you have to have this, if you want to go to university and you have to have this, therefore I'm going to help you get it? Would it be unethical not to help a kid to get good exam grades? I think if you have to cajole and persuade and kid, it's a busted flush. If it was, I always use the example that, you know, schools have all this big in the moment, attendance. You have to attend a building. You can't just attend to learning. You've got to attend to a building. Now, COVID told us that you can attend to learning. But yeah, we're getting excited, and we've now got attendance czars, and we've now got bigger fines, and the BBC are talking about the fines for attendance. You know, we've got police officers and CPSAs and hosts of people trawling the streets, looking for kids, dragging them out of bed. Meanwhile, at Apple, outside the Apple shop, in my local Apple shop, you've actually got people outside stopping the crowds going in. Now, if you're having to drag kids in, I think we have a problem, Houston, because at the Apple shop they're trying to stop them going in to do it orderly. So if it's lovely, you won't have to drag them in. if people could see the value of the exam and the purpose of it, you wouldn't have to cajole them. They would want to do it. And if there was something in it for them beyond the trick of university entrance, or beyond that falsity that, work hard, get A levels and get a good job. And I know we mustn't say that during the exam period, because Clarkson says it and he gets cajoled because not everybody can be a millionaire twit. But the fact that if we're having to cajole or motivate kids to do something which is a bit daft, I learned a lot from dinner ladies, and dinner ladies used to say you can either have cabbage or sprouts. You didn't dress it up into boat shapes, and they didn't hide it. They just said you can have one or the other, you choose. And I think that's where you want to go down and say, well, you can have exams, or you can have that, you choose, and let the market decide. But you've got to have one or the other, because we've got to have some way of saying how brilliant you are. You choose which one you use. That's the market, isn't it? I think we're a market economy. Let's take it the whole way. But at the moment, we've got a bit of a closed shop. And I'm surprised with our present establishment that that's allowed. I thought the market knew best about everything. So now I think it's, I don't know. Ethics is hard, isn't it? Do you have an exam in ethics? I did ethics at A level. I had to do an exam in it. It always was quite funny. But I've got a neighbour who's doing philosophy, and I think he does everything by essay, which I suppose that's then marked by my neighbour who used to be a gardener. So maybe that's not a good example either. I don't know. It doesn't feel very ethical to me in the grand scheme of things, does it? Maybe. I tell you what, let's ask it differently. In 50 years' time, will we think it was stupid? Yes, therefore it's unethical. Let's stop it now. That'll be my answer. Why wait 50 years to wait for it to be nonsense? Let's stop it now.
And Pete, I think that's a great place actually to pull this together. It's been fantastic speaking to you. It's been fantastic listening to you, and I'm sure there's going to be many other questions that will be coming from this. So please feel free either to direct them through to Pete, and he's got his contact details there, or through to Imagine Education, and we'll be happy to continue this conversation. It is one that's going to continue, and it is one that a lot of people have got an awful lot to say about. So broadening this conversation out to as many people and listening to their perspectives would be fantastic. So thank you again for coming along, to listening, and thank you also again to Pete for giving up his time to talk about this. Great work.
Cheers, everybody. Have a good day.